Hi, welcome to The Journey. I'm Michael, your host. Today we're talking about surrendering your pet. There are certain circumstances in life that may make it where you can't care for your pet any longer. What's the right way to surrender your pet? Come listen, come learn, and let's break it down. Today we're talking inside of Pandemic Puppies, and we're with Cassie Dixon. And there's certain circumstances that might make it where you can't care for your dog or your cat any longer. Understanding the proper way and places to rehome your pet and have a happy ending for you and your pet is possible. And we're going to be breaking that down today because this is something that we see here in Clubhouse and across the United States right now, where people are going back to work or maybe they got a dog during the pandemic and maybe the dog it's not the right home, and that happens, and it's okay if that happens. But when you surrender your pet, there's different ways of going about it, and there's easy ways of going about it and understanding it. It doesn't have to be so stressful sometimes. A lot of times I think a lot of people are like, oh my God, I have to give up my pet. What am I going to do? And then they panic and they get into all this panic and they really don't think this out. And so today I've got Cassie here today, and she was in one of my rooms a couple weeks ago, and she broke this down so beautifully and how to really respectfully hold space for your dog and you while you're going through this situation, if you do have to go through it. There's other options out there, and we'll break those down as well, but let's talk about that. I would love to introduce Cassie. She's in Canada. She works with rescues. She's a trainer, and she's got so much knowledge behind this arena. I'm so happy to have her here. Hello, Cassie. Welcome.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate that. I am a certified dog behavior consultant and a certified professional dog trainer, and I do work in the shelter system here in Ontario, Canada, and do a lot of things with animals being surrendered, both cats and dogs. So I see a lot of different things, different reasons. We have a lot of programs in place where I'm currently working, so it's pretty phenomenal to see the help we're able to provide for those people who maybe can't get out of the situation they're in and do feel the need to surrender.
Well, this is such a touchy subject. A lot of people think when they get a pet home and all of a sudden it's not working for the family, the kids, maybe there's some mis energy bouncing back and forth between the kids and the dogs, or the dogs and the family, and it just doesn't work, and people panic. When they panic, what's your first thing, Cassie? Where do we start with this conversation? What's your first thing when people start to have that panic and going, oh my God, this is not working, this is not working? What's the first thing, being that you work with all these rescues all the time, or a rescue, and you see these situations happen quite often, let's say, or not often, hopefully, but they do happen. Where do you start with somebody like that? How do you start to prepare somebody in their mind on how to approach this with a peaceful, loving, empathetic way of handling this?
So it kind of, for me, depends where that's coming from. Now, I do work not only in the shelter system, but I do work with a lot of rescues in my area. There's 12 different rescues that I foster and volunteer for in Ontario. So I'm pretty regularly on the phone with leaders of those rescues or foster parents or things like that, not only with the shelter, but with the rescues. And it depends where it's coming from. So sometimes it very much is like a buyer's remorse that's happening, and they just brought home a new puppy or, a new rescue pet, and they aren't quite, they weren't really realizing what they were going to get into, or some of the behaviors that we may see due to trauma or just being bounced around or whatever the case may be, things crop up. And so my first step is to ensure that the leaders in the rescue and the people dealing with adopted homes and foster parents and all of those fun things know that there is help out there via trainers and behavior consultants. So whether it's in person or virtual, we can help you to work through those things and give your dogs time to decompress. And that's really a large part of it. So my initial step is to ensure that those rescues and things know that there is hope and that things aren't going to turn around in a moment's time. And if you are bringing home a new pet, that you can't expect everything to be hunky-dory overnight. So that's kind of one of the big things, is giving the power to the rescues and those that are working within the rescues the ability to contact appropriate certified trainers that have information and work well with rescues that we can get those pet parents in contact with them and kind of ensure we are taking that empathetic and apathetic approach and allowing them to kind of try to work through it before we enter something like a surrender or return process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I love that we're starting there. So we're kind of going this direction versus surrender direction first. But so the other options before you surrender, that's what you're talking about. And that's, I love this because I think this is so important that people understand this, that first before, like you said, buyer's remorse, they get them home and they're like, oh my God, what did I just do? What did I just get myself into? So working, like you said, like working with rescues, working with organizations out there. If you're struggling, there's so many different organizations now. I know that you even mentioned that there's food banks, and I even have heard that there's even doggy welfare. Have you heard of that?
So I'm not exactly sure. Is that an organization, doggy welfare, or are you meaning more along the lines of like angel funds and things like that to help out in those situations for new pet parents or people looking to surrender?
There's actually organizations that actually help out financially. The person's going through a financial difficult time with their pet and they don't have the means to do it. They're actually here in the United States, there's several different companies doing this.
Yes, absolutely. So I do know those as being called like angel funds, essentially because they aren't typically here in Canada, we don't pay them back. There are some organizations like Maddie's Fund and, things like that here in Canada that do offer help in the moment and you pay it back later when you're able to. And then there are also things that I consider like angel funds that are more organizations or people that donate to a specific situation or specific fund where people in those situations can pull from and then they don't have to pay back. We just ask that you pay it forward. So there absolutely are those things available. So if you don't have the ability to pay for training services or, even medical bills and things like that, if that's the reason for surrender, that your animal's medical bills have just gotten out of hand and you really can't afford it, because that sometimes does happen. And even though we love our insurance companies, they aren't always able to cover everything. So it's important to have those things available. And a lot of people don't know that they are. So that's, yeah, absolutely, Michael. That is such a great area to kind of look into.
And I had no idea until you mentioned this, and I started doing some research of how many organizations there are available for this. And I've learned so much here on Clubhouse, and I always say this all the time in my rooms is like, we don't know what we don't know. And that's why I wanted to bring this subject to light today, is the fact that there are so many things that I didn't know. So I know that if I don't know, then there's other people that don't know. We're just human. We don't know everything. And so if people are getting like that buyer's remorse, or they have a frustration, maybe the dog has a bad behavior with their kids and all that. That's another thing I want to talk about too, is like before you start getting to the point where you want to give up your pet, there are things you can do. Is like you can work on that bad behavior, and you're a behavior consultant. So let's talk about that a little bit. When someone gets their dog home and all of a sudden they don't know the real history of the dog and they see that there's some bad behavior going on, the first thing they may say, oh my God, we have to get rid of the dog. But what's the alternative to that? How can we work on this behavior, Cassie?
So again, it does kind of come down to what behaviors we're seeing, what issues we're seeing. Are they innate behaviors that are very normal for dogs? We just find them undesirable. 90% of the time that's the case. So it's important to kind of look at that. To deal with, or they're just not willing to put their family at risk if they have, say a new baby come into the home and all of a sudden their resident dog starts displaying some pretty severe resource guarding. That's not a situation anybody wants to be in. So there are definitely ways to implement management first to remove the instances of those things happening, and then be able to work on them, to work through them, and to change your dog's conditioned emotional responses to those things or underlying emotions that are going on, instead of suppressing those behaviors, which is often what we don't realize we're doing. And I will say this 100 times over, I've been in those situations where my dog has just done something that has frustrated the crap out of me, and instead of taking an approach that I know I should, I yell. Or, you know what I mean? Or I get up abruptly and I move towards them to get them to stop doing something or whatever. And those things are intimidating and scary for your dog, and we don't even realize we're doing them. because it's a snap decision and it can suppress those behaviors. So I think the really important thing is if you start to see behaviors that you dislike or that you don't find okay, or maybe sometimes people don't even realize that these are innate behaviors for their dogs, like resource guarding. A dog that doesn't resource guard is a miracle to me because 90% of dogs do. It just depends what value of things they resource guard or who they resource guard them towards or whatever the case may be, right? So when you see those behaviors start to crop up, whether it's in a dog you already have and have had for quite some time, or it's a dog that you're just bringing into your home, the really important thing is to get a certified professional trainer on board with you, making those decisions and helping you to work through them, because they're going to have the answers, right? And if it's something that they've never worked with, you can trust that a trainer, and I say this word all the time, certified, certified, certified. You can trust a trainer that has gone and done their due diligence and become certified is not going to step into a situation that they don't know or can't help you with. So if they come and do an assessment and it's severe and they've never dealt with something along those lines, they're going to talk to their mentors, or they're going to send you to somebody who does specialize in those behaviors, or whatever the case may be. So know that there is always hope, and management should come first to reduce those things, but in the end we can work with our animals to change a lot of them. So again, dependent on that behavior, but we always want to reach out to appropriate sources that have science-based training behind them and science-based behavior modification behind them.
So let's back up for 1 second and let's talk about being a behavioral consultant. What is that and how do you become that?
So there are quite a few different avenues, and this is one of the areas where it's kind of one of those consumer beware. Anybody can say they are a dog trainer, right? The dog training industry is not regulated by any means. So a 15-year-old kid that lives up the street that has trained his family dog can say, I'm a dog trainer, and start training people and their dogs. And that's one of the biggest problems. We have more regulation in something like a hairdresser or a stylist, or I'm not really sure what they like to be preferred to be called, but we have more regulation with people in that industry than we do with people who put an animal with big teeth that have, some of them have aggression. There are fears that happen, all of those things. They don't have a regulation for that industry. So that's one of the biggest problems. And if you are working with somebody who is certified, so there are many avenues to become certified. Many are known world around. Others are just organizations that you can pay to be a part of to put their badge on your website and all of those fun things. But certifications, either whether it's behavior consulting or, certified professional dog trainers or whatever it is, they actually have testing that you have to go through. So for me personally, I am certified through the CCPDT, so the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers. They are located in the United States, but they do certify worldwide. I am also certified through the IAABC, which is the International Association of Behavior Consultants. Now, they have certified training programs, certified behavior consultant programs, all of that fun stuff. Both the CCPDT and the IAABC do. The CCPDT is specifically towards dogs. They don't offer any other species at the moment, but the IAABC offers species in working animals, horses, birds, reptiles, felines, dogs, the whole nine. And they are a breath of fresh air because they have ongoing continuing education. They do tons of different things. So in being certified, you can not only go through a, diploma program and become either a PhD or a master's or a bachelor's in behavior, which would be the, college university route, or you can become certified through one of these certifying bodies that does have peer-reviewed testing and all of those fun things. Now, granted, the majority of those things are theory-based, but the whole thing with dog training is that if you don't have the theory behind you, the implication and the implement isn't there either. Whereas, if you're a great trainer, you can do amazing things, everything's wonderful, but you don't follow the science, you do things through suppression or punishment or all of those fun things, you're not looking at the science, I would consider that somebody who has not done their due diligence and isn't following appropriate lines and things like that. So becoming certified is a process. Depending on the organization that you choose, and I have only named a couple, there are many. Depending on the organization that you choose, you're required to do continuing education units to keep up that certification. You're required to have a minimum amount of knowledge, and I say minimum because you need a minimum requirement to pass. There is no maximum. So you could be the most knowledgeable person on the face of the planet and be far surpassing the minimum, or you could just pass the minimum. It's the same as a doctor. Everybody goes to the same school, but somebody has the highest grade, somebody has the lowest grades, but they all graduate, right? So that's kind of where I look at those things. But certification in itself shows that the person you're working with or choosing to work with is dedicating time, money, effort, loads of their personal everything to better education and being able to better help your animals. And that's more what I look to and I send people to and those sorts of things. I'm not going to send you to the kid down the street to work on your dog's aggression that says he's a dog trainer because he's trained his family dog. I'm going to send you to the person who's done 500 to 700 hours with a mentor or training in classes or whatever the case may be, has written those exams and has the science and the theory behind them and all of those things. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we say certified, is those people that are willing to go and get that certification. And I have mixed feelings about certification because it is just letters behind your name, but it does show that you're willing to put in the effort and you want to know the science. And to me, that's one of the most important things. So I hope that answered your question. That was a lot of rambling, but I hope that's fair and that was okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. That was a lot of information. And so I love that because this is the first time being, once again, here on Clubhouse. I've learned this once again, is people are calling them behavioral consultants. And I love that there's this different arena that people can go to because there's like you said, there's a science behind it. So with these groups that are out there like yourself and others, if like we were just talking about angel funds from, people that will donate money to help feed your dog and all that, are there organizations that you know of? Does your rescue company offer any sort of behavioral classes for free that can help people through this moment that they may be frustrated?
So, yes, many do. I can speak to a few. So there are some pretty phenomenal programs in different shelters throughout Ontario and Canada where they do have certified behavior consultants and trainers on staff, where in order to retain the bond that you keep with your animals and have with your animals and try to keep them in your home, they offer those services in order to see if that helps and that can change that need to surrender. So there are definitely a ton. The BCSPCA is one of them. Calgary Humane also does it. I know that one of the Los Angeles Humane Societies does it. 3 near me. So Etobicoke Humane, Toronto Humane Society, and the Durham Region Humane Society, so HSDR, Humane Society of Durham Region, they all do it. So those are just to name a few here in Ontario and Canada, but there are tons all over the place. So a lot of people avoid looking at shelters, and because they obviously understand and know that a shelter is not a place for an animal. Your dog doesn't want to be there. It's not a good place for them. It's not fun for them. It's stressful for them. It's difficult for them. There are so many reasons that shelters aren't great, but there are also so many reasons that they're amazing. You have dedicated staff who work really hard to do appropriate things. And then on top of it, because a lot of shelters are city funded, they do have the funds behind them to help, right? And that's one of the biggest things. So there are tons that do, and I recommend if you're ever in a situation or you know someone in a situation or you have a friend in that situation, you know what I mean? Anybody in that situation where they're like, we don't know what we're going to do, don't be afraid to let them know. Take a look at your local shelter. Ask if they have programs in place. Ask if they have behavior consulting. Ask if they have all those fun things. Some places may require something like, I know here in Canada, there's, Indigenous status and social services and all of those fun things that if you are lower income, you may have to show that via one of those reasons, or, even not lower income, obviously for Indigenous status, but for Indigenous peoples, they are discounted greatly for a lot of places because we should be doing that. So it's a good thing to know that if you have that in place, you can kind of take advantage of it. And I recommend that people do take advantage of it. Don't wait, give it a shot. Don't wait until you're at your wit's end and you don't think there's any hope before looking at surrender. If you start to see problems, if you start to see issues, speak with your local rescues, speak with your local humane societies. A lot of them do have these programs in place, but because so many people are avoidant of surrendering their animals, or they feel shame for doing so because, and I think I've said this before, Michael, we suck at being empathetic when it comes to surrender. And I'm really trying to change that because it doesn't mean you failed. It really doesn't. A lot of people are very avoidant of those places and surrender and all of those things because of the shame that they feel. So don't, you know what I mean? Work with people, talk to people, let people know that those things are available. If you have an inclination that somebody is struggling with their animal, be like, hey, I heard the local shelter may actually have classes that, you might be able to get for free if you talk with them and explain your situation and things like that, because that's what they're there for. They're there for animal welfare. We want to keep your animals in your home. Rescues aren't here and shelters aren't here to take them from you. Not at all. We're here because we want to help you to succeed and set your dog up for success and your family up for success. So if they aren't doing that and your local areas aren't doing that, there are ones that you can contact and do virtually from Canada to the United States. The UK has some of those things. There are often a lot of dog trainers in general, if they specifically work with rescues that run their own private businesses, that offer discounts for those reasons. So me personally, I do online education and things like that, and I actually do offer a discount for animals that have been adopted through rescues or breeders that I work with. And I also offer discounts for people who may be financially struggling. So I always ask on my intake forms and all of those things like, do you need help? And if you do, how can I provide it? And not everybody's willing to give that answer, but those that are going to benefit from it, right? So the more I can spread that knowledge and that education and help people out and go through those things, it enriches my life, not just the animals I work with. So I try really hard to really make sure that people have that and understand that. Your local shelters and rescues are probably going to have something along those lines. And if they don't, they probably have them in the works. So the more people that they hear from that are in need of those services, the more likely they are to implement them faster. So bearing that in mind, absolutely look down those roads. And again, sorry, terrible for rambling, but I hope that answers that.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Well, because like you said, it's like being authentic of like what's going on with your situation is so important when you're looking at this and you find yourself in this place. If you're in this place and all of a sudden you feel like I have to surrender my dog, coming to grips or coming to just an awareness with yourself, you're not the first person that's out there that's had to go through this. And like Cassie's saying, it's like there's an easier way to do this. A lot of people, I think, just in general in the past, in our history, it's like, I know I've heard where people have like taken their dogs and just dropped them off on the side of the road because they just didn't know what to do. Well, in today's time, there's so many organizations like these rescues and these kennels and all these different shelters that are available to actually help you through this, because I've broken it down, because if you really think about it, there's like 7 topics, I think, that are really why people will, feel like they have to like let go of their dogs. And one was like, we talked about this, bad behavior. Maybe 2 is like, if you're moving, maybe you had to like move out of one place and go to the next place and your new landlord is not accepting your pet. And we talk about that as well, in the sense of if that's the situation, you want to kind of put together a portfolio and actually show pictures of your dogs and your dog with your family and how sociable he is, and maybe have someone write, a bio on him, just to present it to the landlord, to maybe even give him the possibility to look at the possibility of allowing you to bring the dog into it. The other one is like what we talked about, is the animal welfare. If people can't afford it, then Another thing we hear too, Cassie, is the fact that have your dog check. If your dog is having some aggression or is anger toward you, aggravated against you, check to see if your dog's suffering from any medical problems. Because sometimes if a dog's irritated and something's going on in the inside, we need to get to the root of the cause to understand what's causing the exterior their personality. Maybe their personality is being affected by something that's going on. And then the other thing is, like, maybe you have to move out of the country. That's an odd one to have inside this list, but it really is. And then also, there's a last one which we hear a lot is, people take their dogs to the vet and all of a sudden they get this bill that it's going to cost this much to take care of their dogs, and they just don't have that funding. And there are different shelters out there that you can work with that can help you with those bills. So those are kind of like I say the top 7 things why people will want to surrender. But like Cassie's saying, there's so many of these organizations today that weren't here maybe 10 years ago that are here today that are there to help you. So get rid of the guilt, get rid of the shame. There's no reason to have it. It works. Be authentic with the shelters. And Cassie, you mentioned this. Let's say we are at this point. We've gone through those 7 top reasons why we may be feeling that we need to surrender our dog, and we still feel that we need to surrender it. Let's go what you mentioned, and this is what I loved because I was listening to our room last night on the journey, is how to prepare to surrender your dog. It's not something that you just drop off in 48 hours and say, okay, I'm done. There's a way of actually doing this with love, compassion, and kindness for yourself and your pet. Do you want to break that down, Cassie?
Yeah, absolutely. So I typically recommend, if you are looking at surrender, there is not hope for you at the moment, and maybe you're just not the right environment for an animal that you have adopted or whatever the case, because truthfully, it is fair to say that. It is fair to turn yourself around and say, you know what, my house is way too busy for this dog that suffers from anxiety. I need to make a different decision, because it's ultimately the welfare of the animal at stake in those moments. It's not failure. So that's one of the big things. First off, you're not failing. That is not what's happening. What's happening is you're admitting that this environment isn't great for you. So for me, I personally say it all the time that I am not a city person by any means. I've spent long periods of time in the city. In fact, my current partner lived in the city when we started dating. So for around 6 to 7 months, I was spending like all the time in the city. And I learned really quickly that the city is not really for me. It's not a great environment. I don't flourish there. I'm not happy there. I don't have the best quality of life there. So if you're coming to that point, know and understand that it's not failure and you do have options. I would typically recommend looking at several different rescues or shelters, humane societies, local animal services, all of those things, and find one that best fits your ethic, your moral, how you train your animal, all of those things. Make sure that you're comfortable with how they do things and that they use, again, appropriate science-backed information when they're implementing behavior modification or training, or in how they find new homes. So how they rehome their animals and all of that fun stuff. Take a look at that, and don't just apply to one, apply to several. And I say that because the majority of shelters and rescues are inundated. A lot of rescues are foster-based. They don't have facilities. And then there are shelters that are facility-based and don't always have a lot of foster parents. So taking a look at that, realize what the best case scenario is for your dog. If you're looking at a shelter environment and they say, yep, we would put this dog into foster, so we would schedule your intake and all of those fun things. We cover all the medical things, and then that animal goes into a foster home. Great, amazing. That means that your dog isn't going to spend a long period of time in the shelter because maybe that's not going to be conducive to their behavior and they're going to have a difficult time. And we're going to see behaviors that maybe they will never show in a foster home. So take a look at those things, apply to more than one, and speak with people and be truthful is one of the biggest things. If you're surrendering your animal due to training or behavior reasons, be upfront about that. Because if you aren't and you can't be, and then they take your animal on based on their capacity, so their ability to care for that animal based on whether or not they have a trainer on staff, or for those foster-based rescues, whether or not they have a foster that can handle that situation. If your dog does not get along well with other dogs and you don't tell them that, you're going to have a really difficult time, or they're going to end up with problems. Sorry. There's my foster dog in the background. You're going to end up with problems, or they will, the rescue, the foster, all those things. And then you're kind of going to be stuck between a rock and a hard place. You can't really feel comfortable and confident that you've done all you've needed to do, because you maybe just put your dog in a situation that they're not going to be conducive with, that may create problems. And in some countries or some states or some provinces and all of those fun things, if you aren't truthful and something does happen, like say a bite happens based on your animal's breed or based on your animal's temperament or based on your animal's age, they may not have the option to continue looking for things for your animal. So it's extremely important that you are upfront and truthful before anything else, because people in rescue are not in rescue because they don't like people. They're in rescue typically because they want to help, not just people and not just animals, but both. That's a big thing for me, and I say it all the time. And we do have a lot of people that work in rescues or shelters or animal services or with animals that they don't get along with people, or they choose to be with animals instead because it's easier for them or better for them. People that suffer from, anxiety and things like that, absolutely, they're going to do amazing with animals in comparison to working, a job where they're face-to-face talking with people or those sorts of things. So keep that in mind, that those people aren't going to shame you. They aren't going to talk about you behind your back. They're not going to do those things. The worst that's going to happen is if you don't tell the truth, then they're going to be frustrated. But if you're upfront with everything, they're going to be empathetic. They're going to do whatever they can to help you. We're going to, we're trying to reduce that shame as much as humanly possible, because it's one of the biggest barriers to not only rehoming, but surrendering as well. So does that kind of break it down a little bit in the start of that process for you?
Yes. And I think one of the things that you were talking about is, I'm just going to break it down a little bit here for me, is rescues want to help you. They're there to help you. And I think just once again, our natural human behavior puts us through so many unnecessary emotions. I think sometimes, this guilt, this, I don't know, just feeling like we're not good enough for our dogs or whatever it might be. And so we have all this guilt going into these places. Just know that these places are really there to help you. That's what they're there for. That's why they're called rescues. They want to be able to help rescue the dog and find it a new home. And it's so, so important to understand that they're not the enemy. They're your friend. And that's number one, I think, to really understand that. And then what Cassie's saying is so, so important, is that you have integrity with being authentic about who the dog is. Give them as much information as you know about the dog. Yeah, maybe the dog's only been in your life for a short period of time, and you see that it has an aggression problem, but make sure you list that aggression problem and let them know what's triggering that aggression problem, because that all those details help the success of finding the right home for that dog. Because like Cassie was mentioning, I'm going to say you're a country girl, Cassie. And she loves the country. Put her in the city and she's like, what the hell is this cement city about? I don't like this. And that's the same with some dogs too. Some dogs are not meant for cities. Some dogs are meant for the country. And especially if you rescued a dog and you live in a city and you don't realize, but that rescue came from maybe a country farm or something outside the city, and now they're in the city. They may be having that same reaction Cassie did when she was meeting, living or staying with her partner. It's that same thing. It's like buses go by, cars go by, their dogs are like, wait a second, I'm used to horses and cows. What is this big machine? So really understand that sometimes matches aren't perfect for you or the dog. And think about it this way too. Your dog may be like going, what the hell is going on here? Why am I here? They may be wanting out of the situation as much as you feel like you need them out of the situation because you can't handle them. It's just a mismatch. And so be authentic about that. Have your intentions properly placed. Write an application. That's one of the things Cassie mentioned the other day, is like when you're going to one shelter, don't go to just one shelter. It's really important that you go to many. Reach out to as many as you can in the neighborhood, because just like Ginger popped in our room, and she's a dog walker trainer here in Southern California. And she was talking in one of our rooms recently about her backlog of now people calling for their services. And now they're sometimes 2, 3, 4 weeks out to be able to set up, dog walking schedules and all that. That's the same thing with our shelters. Our shelters are going to get, here in the United States, they're getting so busy already. I know Cassie and I, we've talked about in Canada, it's not there at this point, which I love. But here in the United States, our shelters are getting packed and they are getting inundated with people. Our rescue rate, our surrender rate was up 83% a couple weeks ago here. And it's alarming. So be authentic, be truthful, write a journal, write an application, put it out to many shelters. Don't just put it out to one, because it's not going to be a 48-hour process. It could be a couple of weeks, but have that compassion for the dog and yourself to understand that this is a process that you can go through peacefully and have a happy ending for you and the dog. Just imagine the dog gets out of the city and back into a farm life. They're like, oh my God, I'm home. And that's the beauty of this. That's the way you want to look at this. You want to really make it an opportunity that you both can win out of this situation. So Cassie, this application that I'm talking about, is there one that they can download on the web that they can fill out, or is it something that they just get from one and they just make photocopies for the other ones? How would that work to make that simple for them?
So every organization is slightly different. The majority of larger shelters and rescues do have that available on their website. Some of the smaller ones, especially here in Ontario, it's not available on their website. You either have to contact them and they'll send it through to you, or they have it available on a link on Instagram or something like that, because not all of them can afford throwing up a website and things like that. So that, again, in your process of choosing which one is most personal, which one are you going to be able to contact the easiest, all of those fun things are important to kind of do. So yes, absolutely check websites, because they will be there if they have them available. Some organizations, you actually have to go through a program to be able to get access to surrender forms. So, for example, the Toronto Humane Society has a pet parent support network that you can kind of contact the pet parent support network, and they will work their bums off to help you in whatever way they can. And that would be whether it's, medical, or whether it's training, or whether it's surrender, or, whatever the case may be, they have that pet parent support network for you. The Calgary and BCA PCAs also have something very similar, but it's called something different. And there is a shelter in Manitoba that at the moment I'm completely forgetting the name, but I was in the National Animal Welfare Association's conference yesterday for the future of sheltering, and they mentioned I'm going to have to look them up and let you know, Michael, but they also have a similar program. So you have to just contact them and say, I need help, I'm looking for surrender, this is the situation, and then they're kind of going to put you through a process. So it's not an easy, here it is, fill out the form, send it in, and 2 weeks later they'll call you to send in your dog. No, you're going to have to fill out those forms, give that information. If necessary, they'll also kind of call you to get further information, or they may have a veterinarian reach out to you and say, we noticed in your application that your dog, say, straining to urinate. That might be a medical problem that's causing pain, that's creating the aggression you're dealing with. Can we look to trying to see if, medical intervention is an option for you, and how can we help? So there are processes in place for everyone. Everyone is a little bit different. Yes, some of them have them on their website. Some of them don't. So those processes are outlined, in whatever areas they have available. Sometimes it's via phone. In northern regions, you have to kind of call them or drive in and talk to them and say, this is what I'm dealing with. Help me out here. So everyone is a little bit different. It's not perfect across the board. Some regions have much more success with certain ways of doing it. So you have to look into the ones that you're looking at specifically, if that makes sense.
I was just wondering, when you're saying all that, we had here in the United States, and I don't know if they had it in Canada, where when we started getting the vaccines for COVID, older people who weren't familiar with computers or didn't really know the ins and out, and it was really difficult for them to schedule their appointments. And all of a sudden this group of people stepped up and became angels and started making all these appointments. Is there any organization that you know of that can be these angels that can help people through this? Has anything been established like that yet?
That is actually a very good question. I don't know. I do know that those organizations that do have kind of like a process where you have to contact them to go through all of those things, they will offer one of their agents that will help those people. So you could call and, go through that route, and they'll, walk you through the process and all of those things. But I have to assume that smaller rescues that maybe don't have that type of manpower aren't going to have that availability, but that would be an amazing organization to get started. I know Benevolent Bully Rescue here in Ontario has a program where they do have agents and volunteers and all of those fun things that will help you through all of that stuff. And I think that they do also offer that out of province and even out of country. So they may be a good resource for something like that. They also offer, they go to some homeless shelters as well as women's shelters and things like that. And they actually do like therapy visits with the dogs that are in the rescue, or personal dogs from the volunteers and things like that as well. So there are similar to, and there may be some places that are willing to help you with that based on their, their ability and manpower. But I don't think there's any organization specifically dedicated to that. So that's a very good question. I will have to look into that as well, Michael.
Yeah, because I was actually working with someone here in Clubhouse, and we were looking at that, and we were like, oh, how beautiful this is. And we were thinking, wow, wouldn't it be nice to have an organization called Strangers with Love, and they just help people with their pets in these situations and just really reach out and just walk people through it. So where do we start? Let's break this down really, really simply, Cassie. Is if someone's at the point, because I love the fact that when you said that, someone goes to a rescue and all of a sudden, they said, oh yeah, my dog's having trouble peeing, and maybe that's the aggression. We mentioned that was part of one of the 7s, is that, what's the health of your dog? But where does someone start? Let's go 1, 2, 3, 4 of starting the process. They found out that they have 2 different missions. The dog has a mission. They have a mission. They don't mix well together. They have to surrender. They're at a position where they can't maybe afford, whatever it might be. So they have to go through the surrender. Where do they start?
So researching local areas would be my first one. Or if you have a friend that's in the animal welfare industry, chat with them. See if they have someone they would recommend, or maybe have a connection that can help you through that. Like you mentioned, working through that surrender process. Start there. Find a place that your ethics and morals and values line up with, that uses appropriate training and behavior modification, appropriate veterinary care, all of those fun things. And your first step would be finding that information and finding a way to surrender. Like I said, trying to make sure that you're doing so yourself with as much transparency as possible is a big thing. So write it down, if that makes sense. If you're like, these are the 5 things that are just outside of my wheelhouse, our family can't deal with, whether it's medical or this or that or the other thing. You can even, sometimes a lot of veterinary clinics that you reach out to, they sometimes offer owner surrenders as well. So you can reach out to them, and they have a few specific foster parents here and there because they just care that much. So they will take on that animal and find them a foster and then find them a home eventually. So there are different ways, but definitely start with contacting the rescues that you feel align with all of those things, and go through their process. Try as best you can not to be difficult, and don't wait until you need that animal gone tomorrow, because that's one of the most difficult things in rescue. Like, I will tell you really quick little story. I received a text message about 2 hours ago from the head of a rescue that I've been working with for about 13 years. And she literally messaged me and said, hey, would you be able at all to take a 45-pound female dog for a week starting today? And I was like, oh, okay. No, I'm sorry, I can't. I have 8 animals in my house right now, like 8 dogs. And I'm leaving for vacation on Wednesday. How can I help with getting you something else, right? Like, do I know anybody, that sort of thing. I obviously didn't say, how can I help? Because I already know the answer. But I went through my list of like, do I know anybody that's a foster parent that could take on this animal right now? Do I know any trainers that may be able to foster this animal for a week? All of those fun things. Unfortunately, at the moment, all of my friends in those situations are inundated, but that's one of the most difficult things. Is it happens so often that people, because of the shame and because of the issues and all of those things, and like I said, we typically don't generally help with that, although there are a lot of organizations trying to remove the stigma of surrender. It's important to know that if you just drop off an animal, if you say, no, I absolutely can't keep this animal right now, all of those fun things like this even sometimes happens with foster parents, where we have a foster parent that's like, I'm doing amazing. Like this has happened with one of the rescues, actually the guy that's currently in my home, one of the guys currently in my home. They were with a foster parent. They'd been with the foster parent for a month. There was a bite incident, and then the foster parent was like, this dog needs to go tomorrow. And that puts so much pressure on everyone in that situation, especially if it happens at 10 o'clock at night, especially if, all of these things. So be prepared to understand that during the surrender process, it's not going to happen overnight. And by doing things like saying, I don't know what I'm going to do with this dog, I'm just going to leave them. Or I don't know what I'm going to do with this dog, I'm going to put them down. Or, anything like that, that doesn't help your situation or the rescue, because it puts so much stress and pressure on the situation that they then need to hurry. They get along and they maybe don't find the best placement for that dog. Or, that dog has to come into the shelter, and where if you had waited 4 days, we could have got them into a foster parent rather than into the shelter system or something along those lines. So be as transparent as you can, start by researching, apply to as many as possible, and be prepared to implement management. Because a lot of the time, even if there is, especially with a lot of the rescues that I work with, even if they're like, I don't have a foster parent at this moment, but in a week, I have a dog being adopted and that foster parent will be open and they're willing to take your animal, be prepared to implement management that they may suggest. So, crating in your home, or the use of baby gates, or even just management in the sense of like, maybe you're going to have to start to acclimate a muzzle so your dog doesn't ingest another thing and end up on, a medical table with another surgery you can't afford, or whatever the case may be. So be prepared to implement that management, be as transparent as possible, and look to more than one resource, I think would be the top 3 for me.
Yeah, you've said that so many times, look for more than one resource. The thing also that you're saying too is, I hear this so strongly, is be prepared. I mean, if you've got your dog, if you've got a dog or a pet at home and you know that it's not working out, don't wait for the last minute, because the last minute is where all that chaos and all that mess comes in. But if you really can be, once again, I think starting like number one with even like starting with yourself, is coming to the awareness and the love for yourself to say, okay, this is not working. What can I do to make this a successful event for everyone involved, the dog involved, me involved, my kids involved, whoever might be involved, and really be prepared to like take that first step, but take it early. Don't wait for the last minute. Like, I'm thinking, don't be a runaway bride. Don't show up at the wedding and just drop your flowers and leave your flowers and run away. That's not the way to handle it. It's like there's so many better ways to do it. And at the end of the day, you're just going to have that much more self-love for yourself and for the process. And we talk about this too, Cassie, like Jen, Liz, everybody, Jessica, everybody that's in the room here with me that does rooms with me. We talk about building your team. I would even recommend reach out to that team. If you have a team, if you have a vet, if you have a dog walker, if you have other people that you rely on with your dog and you're finding that things aren't working out, reach out to them, because they can actually help you probably with the process and give you pointers in where to go and who to go to. I know we're getting to the top of the hour here, Cassie. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like to share that you think is so important for people to understand?
You know what? Absolutely. Yeah. The one thing I would say that I would love to add to this conversation, because there are so many idiosyncrasies when it comes to these things. There are so many working parts in shelters, in rescues, even with breeders. There are so many working parts. And if you did get your animal from a ethical breeder, also look to the breeder. Most breeders, if not all breeders that are ethical and responsible breeders, which oh my God, they're amazing. Like, I love breeders that are like this, because they are, in my mind, the only real breeders. But they will take that animal back on. even if it's 10 years later. They are willing to put that behind their animals. They're not doing it for naught. You know what I mean? So that's something to kind of consider as well. Don't jump to shelter and rescue if you did purchase from a breeder, because those breeders should stand behind their animals, whether behaviorally, medically, because of change of situation for you, all of those fun things. And the other thing would be, as much as we say, like, be prepared, take your time, work through the process as much as possible, all of those things, there are those situations where that's just not possible. And as a person in rescue and in shelters, I recognize that, and so do the rest of us. Like, we know that there are situations where sometimes it is an emergency. Sometimes there is no waiting. Sometimes, like, you have no other option. And in those instances, try as best you can not to feel that shame. And I know that that sounds terrible because it's difficult, because I'm putting the pressure on the person that's going through these issues. But by allowing that shame in and making yourself feel like I'm not making the right choice, or anything like that, if you've come down to it and you're making the choice, it likely is the right choice. And if it's an emergent situation, say, a parent passes away and it's their animal and you can't take that animal into your home because they have special needs or whatever the case may be, and it is emergent, make sure you do let people know and you are transparent that, like, it unfortunately is emergent. There's nothing we can do. Please get back to me as soon as possible. And if you don't hear back right away, don't take it to heart, because there are those situations where, maybe a rescue isn't able to take them on emergent, and you're not going to hear back for 2 days because they are completely volunteer run or whatever the case may be. So in those emergent situations, again, reach out to more resources. In those cases, reach out to friends, reach out to your vet, reach out to, your neighbor that doesn't have animals and might be able to take on that animal until you can get them into rescue or something along those lines. Know that there are people around you that want to help, and that your mental health and the animal's mental health matters in those situations, in all situations for that matter. It matters. And if you are in a situation like that, again, follow those rules, be as transparent as you can, but also don't let people make you feel like you're wrong or it's inappropriate or whatever, because you're not. In those moments, you're not. Nobody can make those decisions for you. They can't say yes, no, maybe, those sorts of things. So if you find yourself in an emergent situation, know that there are people there to help you. And we're going to try as best we possibly can to be empathetic, be there for you, keep intact that bond if there is one, if it is your animal, all of those fun things. But know that there is help. There is hope and there is help. Those are kind of the biggest takeaway for me.
And I love the fact that you brought up the breeders, because I know even like if somebody has a specific breed of dogs, there are even those organizations and groups that you can actually go to as well, and they potentially can help you as well besides just the breeder, but the groups can help you because there's a lot of fostering inside those groups. Do you find that?
Yes, absolutely. Oftentimes if a breeder doesn't have capacity, they know other breeders of the same breed, or they do know breed specific rescues that they'll reach out to, or whatever the case may be. So again, they are just another resource that is fair to reach out to. Now, there are a lot of people that don't necessarily know how to find an ethical, appropriate breeder, and they may be, without knowing it, adopted from a breeder that isn't those things. I've had that situation come up many times where I say, well, did you get your animal from a breeder? Have you reached out to them? And they go, yep, reached out. Breeder won't take the dog because of the aggression. And I'm like, okay. So we find out, unfortunately, too late, that what we thought was ethical, or we just didn't know in the first place how to find an ethical breeder. We've now unfortunately got one from a breeder that isn't. In those situations, again, some people just don't know. And we're really trying as hard as we can to understand those situations, and that sometimes first-time dog owners, 25-year-olds straight out of the gate or even younger, they're like, I just want this adorable dog. I found them on Kijiji or Craigslist or whatever. They don't know that there are ethical breeders out there, or they just at the time don't have the money to support an ethical breeder, so they make the choice to purchase from one of those. If that's the case, again, no problem. This is why those rescues and shelters are there. Obviously, we want to try to spread education, and we might give you that education, and we might try to say, hey, here's a way to find an appropriate breeder when you're ready for your next dog if you decide not to rescue, or whatever the case may be. please try not to be offended by that, because that really just is us trying to say there's better ways to go about getting the animal of your dreams, right? So that's an important thing too. Like I said, there's so many working parts in these conversations that it's difficult to cover them all, but yes, absolutely.
Well, I think you're doing such a beautiful job covering them. Let's talk about really quick the difference between a rescue and a shelter.
Okay, so there can be, dependent on where you are, a lot of differences. A shelter typically, like I said, has a physical location or facility. Rescues typically do not. Rescues are typically foster-based. Now, again, that isn't true everywhere, but that is one of the larger differences. The next one would likely be that a lot of, and again, not all, but a lot of shelters are city funded or province funded or, federally funded. Whereas rescues typically are not. Rescues are typically smaller, friends that got together because of their love for animals and are trying to help as many as they can. So they've purchased and spent all their personal money on getting the appropriate licenses or whatever, or they're in the process of doing so. So they're typically much smaller, but in order for it to be what we consider a charity here in Ontario, specifically where I am, they do have to have a board of representatives. So they do have to have a specific number of people who are willing to sit on the board of that charity to oversee charitable funds, donations, the way that things are run, processes that go through, all of those fun things. So both shelters and rescues typically have that if the rescue is large enough to have, gone that route. And I suggest looking for rescues that do have that charitable organization thing behind them, because it means, again, they've taken the effort and the funds that they have to get there. So it means they're really dedicated to what they're doing. Another one of the large differences is that shelters typically have on-site veterinary staff, whereas rescues do not. Rescues typically use private veterinary clinics to work through any, medical situations with any of their foster animals. And another thing is that shelters typically are multi-species, whereas rescues typically are not. So there's some rescues that are, cats and dogs, but typically rescues focus on one specific species. So you may have a reptile rescue, or you may have a feline rescue, or you may have a canine rescue, or, special species in the sense of like bunnies, guinea pigs, all of those fun things. So that's another one of the big differences. So there are obviously many more than that. Shelters can typically be a bunch of paid staff, whereas rescues are completely volunteer. So again, that's why I say when you're researching those things, find the one that makes the most sense to you. If you really want to support volunteers that are putting in their hours and all of those fun things and aren't getting paid, or maybe, only the higher ups are getting paid in certain rescues and things like that. Whereas shelters, it is paid staff and it is funded by the government, or, even ones that aren't funded by the government. The shelter that I personally work for full time is private owned. It is not funded by city or government or anything like that. And it's one of the largest shelters in the area. So, or facilities for sheltering animals in the area. So that's important to kind of look at as well. So those would be the biggest differences realistically. And those are a lot of differences, but they also do have some crossover. Is that helpful?
I just thought it would be nice just to break that down for anybody in the room that doesn't know the difference, or they really don't understand the full body of the difference. I think that was beautiful how you described it. I do want to go ahead and just kind of go through a really quick bullet point. Research your shelter. Really look for different shelters. If you're in this situation, you need to surrender your dog. Look for a shelter. Look for several shelters. Have your paperwork together. Try to put together a portfolio for your dog and all the goods and bads and everything that's going on. Be as transparent as possible. Check out all the different rescue websites, see what their history is, what they require from you, so that you have it together when you go there, so you can just be, because they're there to help you. They're really help you. And another thing Cassie really said, which I think was brilliant as well, is look at breeders. Breeders are just, they're another person that can be part of this team that can help you place the dog back into a healthy environment. Between the shelter and the rescues, you're going to find somebody, and just never dump your dog. That's the worst thing you can do, is dump your dog, because you're really not doing your dog or you justice. Because one, I think you're going to have nightmares in the future about dumping the dog. Maybe if you're not that type of person, you won't, but I would. But also, you're not giving the dog a chance to really win and find the right home. And by dumping them, and you're just leaving them to anybody to guess what's going on with that dog. and just be really cautious about another home for your dog. If someone says, "Oh, I'll take him," well, really make sure that the dog fits that situation too. So be responsible. You walked into this being a responsible pet parent, so be a responsible pet parent walking out of this. And at the end of the day, you both will be happy. You'll both feel like you've won in the situation. And then, at the very end, when you do surrender your dog, know that you're doing it with love. Don't feel like it's all anxietied out and stressed out. You don't have to feel that way. This is not about shaming yourself or feeling shame. This is about, how do we do this properly? How do we do this successfully? How do we do this to set everybody up to win? With that, I'm going to go ahead and thank Cassie so much for being here. I was so looking forward to this room. There's so much information here for everybody in the room. If you're a pet owner or a trainer in the pet industry, put your arms out there, be a stranger with love, help everybody out, because we're getting through this moment in our time slowly and we're opening back up, but we definitely need support from everybody. So find your team and rely on your team, and don't be afraid to say, "I need help," because that's a big thing us humans have a problem doing all the time, I think, is that we're afraid to say, "I need help." Don't be afraid, because there's so many wonderful people out there that are volunteers that want to help you. With that, Cassie, thank you so much for being here today and breaking this down. And I just enjoyed our conversation. And so I appreciate your time, your wisdom. Your mission is so beautiful. And I just love the feeling that comes from your voice when you're talking about the love and care for other animals and taking care of animals. So thank you, Cassie, for being here today.
I truly appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. It's always a joy. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you again. Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, everybody. I'm Michael, and I'm out.
Thank you, Michael. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.